So, I would like now to actually get into the meat of, and we're going to start with Serena. I'd like Serena just to talk a little bit about the technology behind these works of art that we're seeing around us.
So welcome to this exhibition that we have brought to London from Italy, I would say, but it's very much decentralized as well. So I'll give you a bit about the background in terms of what you're looking at. So here in the room, there are some of the most iconic works from Italian Renaissance and modern art that you see in a digital format. But what you're actually looking at is a unique digital work of art that goes under the name of DAW, which means digital artwork. So Cinello, back in 2016, had this incredible idea, and the founders that are also present here in the room with us tonight, John Blem and Franco Losi, had this incredible idea of preserving the historical art heritage of Italy. While doing that, they've patented a license, I would say, that would allow museums to create digital copies of masterpieces. So exhibitions like this one couldn't be possible otherwise. So what you're looking at is a monitor with a replica of the frame as if we were in the museum. So these are a one-on-one replica of works you'll see in the Uffizi museums, in Milan, in Pinacoteca di Brera, and so on. The frame is handmade by artisans in Tuscany in a little village called Poggibonsi, that you can also hear all about from Luca, that is also in the room. There's a monitor as well. Behind this monitor, on the back of this monitor, there's a little computer that has a file, which is a very high resolution file provided by museums that is encrypted in this computer that is embedded within the monitor. Now, that file has an encryption. The encryption is put on the blockchain as an NFT on the Ethereum blockchain. And also, to add to that, I don't have it here to show you, but maybe my colleague Federica, they can show you, there's a paper certificate. That means is a legal document that is signed by museums directors and countersigned by Cinello, which guarantees the uniqueness of the edition and at the same time protects the fact that the file used by Cinello is the one given by the museum, who are the IP owners. Now, all the artists you see present in this room are no longer with us. We're not dealing with artists or artist estates in this case, but we're dealing with museums directors that act on behalf of the artist and artist estate. So they are the IP owners. And so they will grant the rights to make those DAW, digital artworks. Now, most of the works come in editions of 9, and that's kind of like a common practice, I would say, in sculptures. So we've adopted a similar method to number works that we make available for collectors to collect. Now, very last point, and then I'll move on. Every time you purchase one of these 9 editions, half of the revenue, the net revenue, goes back to museums. And that's a very important thing that Cinello wanted to ensure, that we are actually and actively supporting in this new way of being patrons, let's say, in the digital era, museums directly. So every time somebody is purchasing these works, we are actually supporting museums directly. And that's kind of like Cinello in a nutshell.
That's fantastic. So I'd like to move on now to just to give you a little bit of context, is what museums are facing at the moment in Italy and elsewhere.
Yeah, I could offer just a few numbers. European museums, and according to the last survey carried out by NEMA, which is the Association of Museum Statistics, reported in 2020 that in 1 year of pandemic, European museum lost 70% of visitors and between 70 and 80% of revenues. These numbers are impressive, but the Italian situation was even worse. If we consider only state-owned museum, like the Uffizi or the object that you see by here, they come from state-owned museums, like the most famous, like the Uffizi or the Accademia di Brera or the Academy in Venice. They lost 85 of visitors and almost 90% of the revenues. So when they were called to deploy digital strategies and that require huge investment, they lost the main sources.
The same situation is for the World Heritage Site in every world, because during the pandemic, obviously, is more and more World Heritage Sites, is places, monuments, or museums are totally closed. And in many countries, this is a very great problem, because it's the only revenue for more people, because not only in the vision of European mission, but the other country is very, very difficult, this situation. Maybe the lesson from the pandemic situation is very important for the future of the museum.
The pandemic forced the museum to rediscover local audiences or community engagement. This is the official, statement that every museum director was forced to make. There was no alternative. But the question is, a museum like the Uffizi are based on international tourists, so they dropped by 90%. So the community, target is unable to sustain museum in the long run. What happened is that during the pandemic and through some digital experiments, whose quality is disputable, museum discovered that the digitization could obviously increase the reach. So they were able to get in touch for the first time with international audiences. But if you look at virtual tour offered with living guides, which is a phygital solution, there are few museums which are able to get paid when they offer the service. So the question is, you could reach new audiences, you could enlarge your, and you maybe are able to get in touch with the young targets, but they don't pay. And so unless the state intervened, as happened in England when the reform was decided in 2003, removing any assessed fee in the state-owned museum. Unless it's happened in Italy, we still have to reconsider the financial sustainability in the long run.
I'd like to move on now to Misan. One of the things that we spoke on the telephone, was about how the analog and the digital realms can coexist. Perhaps you'd like to talk a bit about that.
Coexistence to me is crucial. When I go to fancy dinner parties and mention NFTs or Web3, a lot of people from the traditional art world think I'm challenging their very existence. And I think we need to move past that narrative. And why we are here today is a gleaming example of what's to come. I think the irrevocable proof of provenance and scarcity that smart contract technology offers is something that is going to be incredibly useful for the traditional art world, frankly speaking, and also just speaking commercially, the wall of liquidity that is coming into crypto art. And a lot of this liquidity hasn't been exposed to old master paintings and the extraordinary stories around master paintings. And I think if you're thinking about the future of these great, great houses of the legacies of many nations, we have to start speaking in the language that this new technology will listen to. And what Joe's put together here is really interesting, the quality of the rendition. And if you can imagine that these are what I would say small editions, but in the future, I'm sure many museums will do one-of-ones that will be able to bring in the kind of money that the museum desperately needs. So that is a coexistence that I would hope that even the most sort of staunch negative naysayers on what blockchain technology is in their mind will at least stop and listen and see the example of what the work that you're doing here today. So we have to marry digital to give a version of the experience in real life, in Web 2, if you like, for these institutions to survive. It has to be a coexistence. It cannot be either or.
Serena, one of the things that we discussed when we were preparing this talk was the the fact that with these digital reproductions, you can curate an exhibition that would be impossible in the real.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is actually the case. Like the room laid out as it is here couldn't be possible otherwise, as I said before. Like these kind of works, the reason why Cinello actually approached museum is because, number one, we wanted to somehow, take the artistic heritage beyond us. Like within time, those works will decay. And if we think about 1,000 years from now, I know it's a long time to imagine, but digital can actually be transported. Like this is the best technology we have at present time. But in 100 years of time, who knows whether holograms or other things we cannot even imagine right now will be possible. But if you do have a digital file, you can somehow transport it and into something else, and it could live beyond us, whether the materia will decay. And that's something we know as a fact. So the main purpose was to somehow protect the artistic heritage. And secondly, of course, it's very important to mention that curators can have a lot of fun with these kind of things, because there's also editions made for exhibition purposes that Cinello makes available. That means museums will be able to take the DAW to museums at the same time. Let's say you're organizing a show in Boston and one in Dubai with a retrospective of Leonardo, and you could do so. And that way people will access the works. So in terms of accessibility, education, everything will be more, accessible in a way. So curators can have a lot of fun, and museums can welcome more audience into the walls, into physical museums, and at the same time supporting the museum that is actually hosting the original works, with a revenue model that is very ethical and very much in support of the preservation of the original works.
Museums for many, many years were not concerned with their environmental footprint. Just consider what happened during a temporary exhibition, in which 90% of the physical installment is destroyed after the event. Cinello-like solution could reduce the environmental footprint. And this is not just because simply everyone today wants to be greener or more concerned. Is important in order to redefine the social ethical role of museums. So they're revising their conservation strategy, because even in July and August you have to guarantee 19 degrees or 50% of humidity. So museums are on the verge of reconsidering their strategies, and in this regard, this kind of production could really modify the perception and the impact.
I think it's very interesting, the idea of the possibility to have a masterpiece available for a new exhibition in the world, and the possibility to create an alternative, but without lost the aura of the original.
My answer is no. Even like the advent of Spotify or Apple Music, our willingness to pay for living music concert was not decreased. So we pay 10 times what previous generation were used to pay for a living concert in the 70s to 80s. So, and I'm enough old to remember when the most expensive concert were £20 and not $100. So I present that digitization will not reduce the aura of the original. So it requires new narratives, that's true.
Of course, we all know that it's not the original, but it's not sustainable to bring the original here or to make it travel. So we have to accept the fact that there's too many of us on this planet. We cannot all travel to Florence or have the luxury to travel to Florence, pay a ticket, visit a museum, but at the same time, we're not going to miss out on Caravaggio's paintings and learn more about what happened back then. So I think this is a good way of still accessing art without missing out on the aura.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll dare say that in some instances it can enhance the aura. If you blindfolded everyone in this room and didn't tell them what we were doing, and particularly that, I'm not sure most people would presume it was a digital reproduction. It's extraordinary, and this is just the beginning of the technology. So it's just going to get better and better, and it makes it borderless. You just think what you can do with schools, universities, that just won't be able to give children, which I think they're not mentioned enough, and it's important that they understand the history of art in a way that marries technology. You know, the age of Fortnite and multiple metaverses and Roblox is their culture. And what I always tell when I'm having board meetings regarding Southbank is that we mustn't be so arrogant to think that they will come to us because we know how great the history of our art is. This is a new generation, and we have to deliver the greatness in a way that they understand.
So I'd like to move on to a slightly more practical thing. Who is going to buy these? What are the collectors going to do? And that is open to everyone.
Just interesting about buying liquidity. One of my friends has bought one of these pieces, and he's certainly not a traditional old master guy, but this is speaking his language now. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. And there are many more men, women, DAOs like that that could afford to support the traditional museums.
I think a lot of interest came from the fact that NFT and other buzzwords became common language and vocabulary these days. So I think we all became way more familiar with the fact that owning something that is digital is not that odd, and could actually have a value which translates in a monetary value and actually emotional value. So I think it's collectors, I would say, are very young. Compared to more traditional collectors. They understand Web3 very well, and they know all about it. So I've been meeting collectors that range between 25 to 45. They're very much into these kind of collecting.
What is striking is that many new generation of collectors are driven by social motivation, and supporting the museum in such a way like Chanel is doing is a strong motivation itself. So we're not only talking about pleasure or owning, or it's not only a matter of possession, but they know that through this collectible they could sustain museum and a conservation of objects that are destined to disappear in the long run.
And I'm going to go all Gary V here, but listen, clout, showing off one's wealth, one's influence, don't sleep on that. Some of the most expensive paintings of all timelines I've seen in real life are owned by men or women that I wouldn't say they're supporting museums. They're showcasing that they can't have them, and that's going to happen as well. And it's depressing, but it's Sotheby's and Christie's. I wonder the percentage of things that go on auction that are bought by those groups of people. As I said, there is a wall of liquidity arriving. And yes, there will be people that want to support the legacy of the art history of a country, of a type of art, but there will be people that want to come and have things that few people can. And the combination of all of those types of people will be able to support the museums that we all love. And I foresee a future where this technology will be used by almost every museum, and it will be more of a job for the Web3 side of things to be supporting and maintaining the museums that we have. And most collectors would actually be more comfortable having a digital version of priceless masters in their home than having the real thing themselves.
I'd be interested about a secondary market Because I know that there is a mechanism for that, and a little bit of money goes back to
The way it works on the secondary market, let's say once a piece will resell, Cinello will support you in transferring the ownership of these works, which means the paper certificate, which hopefully I will show you in a few moments, will be then passed over to the new collector. Same goes for the NFT token, which is impossible to transfer or burn otherwise. So you as a collector have that protected. That means nobody will burn your Raffaello, ever. But it can be transferred to a new collector. So it's 50% on the net for the first sale and 2% going forward. So it's kind of like a very good sustainable model. So I can tell you that the works go from 100,000 plus, so to 250 roughly. I'm speaking in euros now. I don't know how much that translates in. Yeah. For each edition, yes. But there's been some studying around the pricing of the works, and that very much goes in line with what the market value is for those artists. But it's very difficult to say because most of those artists are not available on the market, so you can't buy them. So it's very difficult to make up a price that you cannot compare it with anything else.
Sorry, I've just looked at my watch and I see we're well over our time that is allocated. So I want to thank very much, first of all, the audience for coming and being so engaged. I particularly want to thank our wonderful speakers. So thank you for coming and thank you for enlightening us on this show.